I'd like to announce first that the official release date for HolyWood is November 14th, and our world tour begins October 27th in Minneapolis. Disposable Teens is the first single. Since so many people had questions regarding the album itself, I'll start with that. HolyWood, when taken on its own, is a record about revolution. It's a record dealing with the evolution of man and where violence comes from. When incorporated with the other two albums before it, it's more of an autobiographical story. After I finished writing Antichrist Superstar, I painted an ending, and I knew that there was more to tell. But the strange thing was that the story itself, since it was my own, began writing me. So I was in a position where I had projected myself as something that I am today, and I knew what it would take to get there, and I knew what I'd have to do to myself to make that transformation, but I still had to live it rather than just tell it. So I began by going backwards. And HolyWood itself deals a lot with growing up, and it deals a lot with relating to the way I think a lot of people feel today in America, trying to exist in this culture that makes you feel worthless. And I feel like if you treat somebody like they're worthless, they're going to treat others with no value as well. The story, if I were to put it in a simple paragraph or two, is my story, but I chose to tell with metaphors. HolyWood itself is a name and a metaphor I created for the perfect world, or the ideal that everybody tries to hold up as what we all should be. And the story is about spending your whole life trying to fit into that world that doesn't want you, and being knocked down over and over again, and just fighting and fighting until you finally get there. And when you get there, you realize that everyone around you are the same people that kept you down in the first place. So that causes a resentment. And in this case, that resentment became a revolution. And with anyone who starts a revolution, there's always an idealism that you can change the world. And rather than changing HolyWood or the rest of the world around me, that revolution became turned inside out, really, and it ended up being another product, and it ended up being everything that I was fighting against. And the only thing that you can do at that point is to destroy what you've become. And that's the story that I saw beginning with Antichrist Superstar as a story that I ended up living, and that goes through Mechanical Animals and now back to the beginning with HolyWood. The name HolyWood itself, most people would assume is as simple as a take on Hollywood, and because entertainment is being attacked so much now, it was a point of me to discuss and think about where violence really comes from. On a deeper meaning of HolyWood, it's the irony that Christ was crucified on wood from the tree of knowledge. And I think that says a lot about how far we've come, and at the same time how little we've accomplished. And there were several people that I thought about when looking for an answer and looking for examples of why we behave the way we do. And the first was Christ. And the story that I told you earlier about revolution could easily be the same story of Jesus, because he had a lot of dangerous ideas that people were afraid of. And I'm sure in his lifetime he never imagined he would be a piece of merchandise to wear around your neck or to hang on a wall. And he ultimately sacrificed himself to put an end to it. Throughout the years I've always felt like I wanted to disbelieve that story, but instead, when writing this record, I thought it would be more interesting and open-minded to believe it on my own terms. So I think in some ways Christ really represents the first celebrity, the first rock star, and that idea of martyrdom was passed along. I think the second time it was picked up in such a dramatic way was with Kennedy. And people want to blame films for being violent, and I don't think there's anything more shocking than I've ever seen growing up than the Zapruder film. And I think because of how it affected the world and how many people were watching when it happened, Kennedy became the second Christ in a way. The third example was on more of a musical level, and that was of John Lennon. And it particularly pertains to a song on our record called Lamb of God, where I reference Lennon and the fact that he wrote a song on Revolver called All Across the Universe, and he sang Nothing's Going to Change My World, and Mark David Chapman came along and proved him very wrong, and that was always something growing up that was very sad and tragic to me, and something that I always identified with. And that brought me into more of an obsession about the year I was born, 69, because I started to see parallels between the way the 90s ended and the way the 60s ended, because we're in such a cultural explosion now. And here with the internet, the fact that I can talk to you right now and nobody's censoring or editing my ideas, it's a very powerful time in history, and it's one that is remains to be seen what we do with that power. But looking to 69 and how things ended, I became quite obsessed with the White Album and with the Stones, because this house here where I recorded the album in, the Stones lived here when they wrote Let It Bleed, and that album became the main focus of what they performed at Altamont, which ended in a very tragic, similar case as Woodstock 99. And I think the Manson murders, which were strongly associated with the Beatles because of Helter Skelter being written on the wall, were equally exploited in the same way that Columbine was last year by the media. So I think that there was some strong parallels, and the fact that the Stones and the Beatles, and particularly the White Album, were the first pieces of music to be blamed and associated with violence, it became something that I was attracted to and something that greatly inspired the recording of HolyWood. So all of these things were a strong influence when making this record, and I knew that it was important for me to take the time and respond in an artistic way rather than feeding into the media that was creating the entire problem to begin with. So for the rest of the album, I'd rather leave it up to the listener, and I'd like you all to make your own conclusions. The story that ties the three records together is told in greater detail with specific characters, and the metaphors are made into more dramatic events in my novel HolyWood that's going to be out at the beginning of the year. And I wanted the record to exist on its own, and when you read the book it takes on a new life, but they're not tied down to each other in a burdensome or self-indulgent way.